We are in Kuf Yud Beis, Halach Yud Beis. Im Ofa Ovid Kechom Hapas, V'lo Chitui Yisroel Uv'lo Kisem. The guy baked the bread, and the Yid did not participate at all in the baking. He didn't do anything. So what's the din? I feel Karmu Pnei Hapas for Tanur, even if the pas reached the level of Karmu Pnei Hapas. We'll see what that means in a second. Still, Moil Chitui Yisroel, Kol Zman Shapas Tzorech L'Tanur, Umashbiach Baf Yosef, Adayim. The Yid can still add to do something to the cooking. He could do chitui, even if the bread is already past the point of karmu pnei hapas, as long as it still needs some part in the baking, that's good enough. And those who say shafil hoitzi hapas, even if they took the bread out of the oven, there are those who hold it. You could still put it back into the oven, and the Yid could do that part of it if it's mashbiach, if there's still something to be gained from putting it back in. Okay, so first is this word, the mechaber.
Is this by bishul or is this by afiyah?
We're talking about afiyah. Okay, we're talking about pas. So the first thing is the mechaber said that the food was baked by the guy and it was karmu by pas. It got like some kind of a crust on it. Okay, and what does that mean? So the Chalkas Binyamin is medayik from a Gemara in Shabbos. The Binyamin Cohen, the son of Raphael Cohen from the Bali Shulchan. He has a sefer on Bishul and Pasagel and on many other things. So he makes a dig from
my ignorance.
It's okay. But makes a dig from a Gemara in Shabbos that Karmu Pnei Hapas means that when I first read it, I thought the word Karmu Pnei Hapas meant that it was like fully baked. It even had like a crust to it. He says no. It means is that it's Kamachel ben drusai. It's equivalent to a food which is Kamachel ben drusai.
And then the first part of the Shabbos.
It's not a Rashi. Okay, yes, that's correct. That you're correct. That's where he brings it from. The Karmu Pnei Hapas means that it's Kamachel ben drusai, and the food is partially cooked. Okay, it's edible. It's partially edible. So
they done on all sides of the bread.
That's a maflikus. That's a maflikus. But for our purposes, that's sort of not negated to us. Whatever it is, it's Kamachel ben drusai. It's passably edible, but it's not fully cooked. Okay, it's a big shiloh whether it's all on all sides. Okay, now. The Gemara says.
I like it. I buy it.
The Gemara says. The Gemara says that if a Yid cooked the food, Kamachel ben drusai, he cooked it that much, then even though they took it off the fire, they did whatever they wanted. The guy could cook later on. It doesn't make a difference. It's ready for salt and it's smoking. And our din is talking about the opposite case. Okay, that thing that I just mentioned to you, which is that the Yid did the beginning of the cooking, is in Kuf Yud Gimel Halacha Ches. Okay, and our din, and the svara is once the Yid made it, it's Bishul Yisroel. He made it to the point that it's edible to Bishul Yisroel. The guy can't ruin that. It already is Bishul Yisroel. And our din is going to talk about the opposite case, where the guy made it to be Kamachel ben drusai or Karmu Pnei Hapas. The guy made it passably edible, and at this point it's not Bishul Yisroel yet. Could the Yid, or in our case, Paso, can the Yid come and do something to make it? Can the Yid come do something to make it Paso afterwards? Okay, so the question is like this. What we have to discuss is like this. In our din, we're going to see in Kuf Yud Tes, Kuf Yud Gimel Halacha Tes, Kuf Yud Gimel Halacha Tes. Okay, Halacha Ches was that if the Yid did the first part of the cooking, it stays mutter for good. Halacha Tes brings 2 days. The Rosh says that what happens if the Goy did the beginning of the cooking? The Rosh says that if the Yid does the end of the cooking, that's fine. That the bread becomes mutter. It was also at the beginning, it becomes mutter at the end. That's what the Rosh says. Yes. And the Rashba says that no, once the Goy did the beginning of the cooking, it's farfallen. You can't do anything about it anymore, and the Yid can't take it back. Okay? What's the din? The Ramah passes like the Rosh, he's Mekel, and the Mechaber says the din is like the Rajma, that once the guy made a fish lakum, it's aser, except the Mokum have some rubo or some Erev Shabbos. He doesn't say that. It's Erev Shabbos. Okay, so whatever it is, he says it's mutter. Okay, so according to the Ramah, he says over there that it's by Bishul Lakum. He says, Befer said, we pass like the Rosh. Yeah. So who din over here also? Here's Pasakum. It's the same din also. You'd be Mekel. Okay, and the Ramah L'chayr is not saying it here because he's relying that on Kuf Yud Gimel he's going to say that din over there. He passes like the Rosh. The question is...
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
See, it's very similar to what he does by Bishul Yisrael. That the Sfardi, the Mechaber would be more machmer than the Ramah.
Our question is,
It seems over here.
so our question is going to be, we have two questions.
Hit it.
The two questions are that the machaber over here does not seem to be the same as the machaber over there. Okay, we have in two angles. One we'll talk about a little more, and one a little less. Two ways that the machaber does not seem to be the same here by Pas as he does over there by Bishul. The first one is that the machaber starts off by saying, if the guy did the beginning of the cooking until it was Kamacha ben drusai or Karmu prayer Pas, the machaber says the yid can do the end of the cooking. If the yid does the end of the cooking, that makes it mutter. He says even if he makes the end of the cooking, that's mutter, as long as the food still needs a little bit more baking, meaning it's not completely cooked. The yid can still participate, which sure sounds like what the Rush says. Okay,
Right.
but what do you say?
The master of cooking, let's say it's like 99% ready.
No, so the machaber, we're not going to talk about that here. When Kufi test, when we get to your Gimel test, we'll talk about it
Like
there.
the pasta, right?
We're talking about Passover here. The machaber says if it was Kamei ben drusai, the equivalent of Kamei ben drusai, if the yid finishes off the cooking, that's good enough.
It was more, am I going to say? It was 95% cooked.
We'll talk about that when we get to the Kufi Gimel. We'll talk about that. But the point that the machaber is saying that the yid could do the end of the cooking and it's mutter, and the machaber over there says that if the yid does the end of the cooking, it's not enough. If he says you could be samach on that, but basically he's paskin lahachber. So why over here is the machaber saying that it's is being makel and say the yid can do the end of the cooking, and over there the machaber says that the yid cannot do the end of the cooking.
Are we already makel by Pas?
What? So you can say maybe it's only cooler by pas? Okay, you could say that. You could.
But we see other coolers.
You could say, and maybe, and what we're getting to that is maybe that's what the Gra holds, because the Gra learns these dinim exactly the way I just said it to you. That the machaber's day over here is like the Rosh, the machaber over there is like the Raj, but he doesn't say how to answer the kasha. He doesn't even ask it as a question, and maybe he'll say by pas we're makel and by bishul we're machmer. Maybe such a thing. Maybe it could be such a shita. It could be. I don't see people saying that, but maybe that's what it is. Okay, I don't know what to say about the Gra, because the Gra learned the way I just described it to you, and he doesn't even ask it as a question, like how it seems to be a steer. Okay. However, the answer to the question really, I think, is very straightforward, and that is like this. When a drop of history, if you'll excuse me, when the Beis Yosef wrote his pirush on the Torah, okay, it's called the Beis Yosef. Okay, he then reviewed that pirush that he wrote, and he wrote hagoyos on that, and he called that bedek habayis. Okay, he wrote other things that are called bedek habayis. So this din in Kuf Yud Beis, our din that we just saw halacha Yud Beis, is the very last piece of Beis Yosef in Hilchos Pasakim. It's not in the same order we have here. It's the very last one. And at the end it says three words, V'ayin b'simin shabasamach. See the coming simon. Okay, now, he doesn't know what he means. Okay, it doesn't say what he means. What do you see in the next simon? What is he trying to tell you? So, for now, you'll see that I think I'm more reasonable thing I'm right. We'll assume that he means to say is, over here I'm telling you that the din is, that it's mutter. And in the siman shabasamach, you're going to find out there's reason to think that it's usher. Okay? That's conjecture, okay? But the reason why I'm conjecturing that is because when you go to the Beis Yosef in Kuf Yud Gimel Halacha Tes, where he brings this Rosh and Rashba, in the middle of his discussion, there's also a bedek habayis, okay? And there the bedek habayis brings a Rabbeinu Yerucham, okay? And the Rabbeinu Yerucham says like this. He says, Rabbeinu Yerucham brings both days. He brings the 2 days, and he says, even those who are machmir to say that the yid can't do the end of the cooking, I mean, the Rajba, he brings the Rajba, can't do the end of the cooking, even those who are machmir, they're only machmir if the guy did his part and took it out of the oven. But if the food stayed in the oven, and the guy just at the beginning of the cooking, the yid didn't show up until it was partially cooked,
and then he was mighty.
And then the yid did something while the food was still in the oven, before it came out of the oven, everyone agrees that it's mutter over there.
That's what baking is.
What? What do you mean? The guy put it to the oven. Let's say it takes a half an hour to bake.
Right.
20 minutes in, the yid walked in and it was already partially cooked. The yid could still finish. If the yid finishes cooking, everyone holds that it's
But not
mutter.
a new
And that's how
official.
you bake bread.
What do you mean that's how you bake
So
bread?
it's still
Right, okay, well, it's still in the oven. As opposed to the machlokes, the Rashba, and the Rosh is where the guy did his part of the cooking.
Took
He
out.
par baked bread. Okay, he did par baked bread like we have. A guy did partially baked it. They took it out and they shipped it to Dunkin' Donuts. Okay, partially baked. And now the yid took it out of there and did the end of the baking. That's where the machlokes is. But in the case where it's still in the oven from the original cooking that the guy did, there everyone
I thought the
agrees.
machlokes between the Rosh and the Raj was only mentioned by Bishul.
But the machlokes
You're
is the
right
same
to
as
say
Bishul and
it's up,
Pas.
up.
But
Well-
even by Bishul, if the guy cooked it part of the way,
No, that I
cooked it
understand.
part of the way,
That I
and it's still on the fire, the yid
But
can fix it.
when the Rosh and the Rajba are speaking, they're going in the case of bishul.
They happen to be, right? But there's no reason to say
It's a hainuhach.
you could say that we'll make
the
hold
Torah, like
we
the
said
Torah.
some we hold like one by bishul and one by pas. It could be such a thing. They don't say that. There's no indication like that. But the Rabbi Yehuda on this din when the Bedek Habayis, when the Beis Yosef is correcting what he wrote over there, he brings it. You should know Rabbi Yerucham says that even the machmirim in that din in halacha test, the Rashba who's machmir when he finishes
Gimel, right.
in Kufiyat Gimel when he finishes off the baking, that's only in a case with the yid with the thing that left the fire. But if it stayed on, it would be mutter, and we would understand it. Okay, he doesn't say what it means, but we understand it is that if the guy cooked food or he baked food, and he finished, he did his thing, the food is usher. Sort of like we say chanan. In other words, once he finished his thing, it's usher. It became usher. But so if I want to now come and make another cooking and somehow fix it, that's the machlokes of my extra cooking could somehow fix it because it was already stuck as being bishul.
Well, I don't know if you have to...
But in our, let him talk. Let him talk. But in my in this case, in the case where it's still on the fire, the cooking to get it to be even kamach ben drusai. The guy did part of it. The guy did part of the cooking, and I'm involved in the same cooking. It's not I did a different act to do this thing. In the same cooking that the guy did, I also participated. So in there, Rabbi Yerucham is saying everyone holds that since I'm in the same cooking, I did. So it's not so important whether I did it first or second. It's as opposed to if it's in a separate cooking, then the first cooking is over. The thing that made it par baked or par cooked is over. That thing is now nikva as being usher, and it is bishalakim. And the rush now has to be machadish that you can turn it back into being mutter. Okay. Whatever.
Does it help here?
So what helps over here is what happens is now you look back in the mechaber, you'll see that the mechaber is meduik that he means to say this because the mechaber says the first case in the mechaber has two cases.
We test and test.
In Yud Beis. In Kuf Yud Beis, Halach Yud Beis. And if you read it simply, you think he's talking about the first case and the second case are a makel, v'yesh ayrim, another din, on the same case. It's not true. The second case is v'yesh mishayrim shafilu haitzi hapas. The second case is where you took the bread out of the oven. Meaning the first case is where you didn't take the bread out of the oven. The bread is still in the oven the whole time. The guy started the cooking. The bread is still in the oven, and then the yid went to do his tikkun to fix it up. That's the reason why he's being makel in the first in the beginning of halach. He's being makel because the bread is still in the oven and never left the oven. As opposed, based on what Rabbi Yerucham says, as opposed to in Kufiyat Gimel, there the bread came out, the food came off the fire. That's when there's a machlokes to Raj Benush. Okay, and
with the Machaber Paskin the following that if it seems over here that if it was fully baked, the challah was fully baked, it came out of the tanur, so the yid did not want this to be passed out, so he put it back and he says, let it bake, even though it was fully baked, I'll bake it another minute.
So,
that's what it seems
so
like.
that's sort of what Yossi was talking about before. We're going to wait. I'm not going to answer that question. In Mirza Hashem and Kufiyat Gimel Tez.
I want you to come back.
That's right. In Kufiyat
I
Gimel,
mean that's your mutter.
you had no having.
No, it's fully baked. They
Okay,
can't
so
touch it.
it's a question. In Mirza
It's
Hashem,
almost fully baked.
in Mirza Hashem,
I mean, well, let's say putting on the poppy seeds or anything.
That's
like
not part of the baking.
okay, in
Oh,
Mirza
Okay, so-
it's on?
I'm trying to think of really a Metzias that when it came out, it was baked, and then what you could do.
So I'm going to ask you to be
3 months from now.
Be patient.
About 3 months.
Kufiyat Gimel Lach. Two things that we're not talking about over here. One is that child. It's the
Turn the
one.
light on.
We're not talking about Metzias.
No, we're not talking about that child. Till how long can the yid save it? Is there an end? Does it get so baked that the yid can't save it? That's for there. And the second child we're going to talk about there also is whether the coolers that you have of how you make pas Yisroel, which we hadn't talked about, we started kisim here. Does that also apply in this case? Or do you have to maybe do something more to save it once it's ready to be Those are going to be halachas
So we
later.
read the Yesh
But anyway, v'yesh mishaymer,
That's the Rosh Shita.
v'yesh the yesh
When you hotzi the bread.
yesh.
Some people say it's still
Right.
Yesh Tekal.
That would be the rush.
That's the rush. That's just yesh mishaymer. We're going to get that in a second. Why? But that yesh mishaymer. We'll get right. Hold on that a second. Okay. Now another way to see that the mechaber in Kuf Yud Beis does not mean to paskin this over the first part does not mean to paskin like the rush. He's not trying to say that, which I mean the simplest way to say that is because if you look in Beis Yosef, he doesn't say a word about it. He brings other people. This is based on other people. It's surprising that he doesn't bring, and that's why the Bedek Habayis says I am Simon Shabbat because you're not really getting the whole story over here. Okay, but anyhow, but the Beis Yosef brings this in from a Sefer Agur, who's bringing a Shari Dura. Okay, just for your perspective of where things are, I'm going to hear the next name in a second. The Sefer Shari Dura is from a Talmud of Maram Rutenberg. Okay, and the Ramah wrote another Sefer called Teres Chatas. Okay, that Sefer Teres Chatas, and I'm telling you, you'll see why I'm saying this in a second, follows the order of the Sefer Shari Dura. Okay, then
Did it come later? Did the Shari do it? Didn't the Marami Rapper come after the Ramah?
no, before.
Oh.
So the
Before?
Teres Chatas,
the Rebbe of the Rosh.
Was?
Rabbi of the Rush.
Uh-huh.
so
They have a story with him.
the Shari, the Teres Chatas follows the order of the Shari Dura. Okay, you see, if you ever looked at it, it looks funny. It says this is Siman Chof Beis and Chof Gimel. Why couldn't he just give it one number? Because he's following the order of the Shari Dura, and he says in the Hakdama, the reason why I'm following that order because everybody's got the sefer in their house. So I want to this sort of like not
Make
exactly,
it easy.
like a kitzur shulchan. Like everyone's got it in their, he doesn't mean it because he says exactly the opposite. Everyone has a sefer in their house, so I want people to understand. And I'm going to follow his order. It'll be easy. That's just perspective of who the Shari Dura is. Okay, so the Shari Dura brings the sefer Oger brings from a Shari Dura. Okay, and what the Beis Yosef brings is word for word from the sefer Oger. Okay, but the Shari Dura says it a drop different than the way the sefer Oger brings it. I'm going to tell you what it says in the sefer in the Shari Dura. The way he describes the first case, he says, Kozman dahavi hapas betanur, yochel lahachshav hatanur could go in a certain way. Okay, so he makes a point that his first case is Kozman that the pas is in the tanur, you could do the following. When he describes the second case in the Mechaber is really these two didn't. When he describes the second case, he says it as im shochach v'lo hichshav hatanur ukvar hoitzi hapas. Okay, and in the first case, the food is still in the oven, you can do it like this. If you already took it out, then we have a shayla like this. Okay, so he's even more clear that he's trying to make this point, which the Rabbi Yerucham says, which is really what our din is saying, is that there's a difference between whether the food ever left the oven. If it left the oven, then we have the machlokes, the Raj and the Rush. But if the food is still in the oven from the original baking, then we don't have a machlokes, and the Yid could finish it off. Okay, that's how he learned that there's no machlokes. Now you could say, I can't tell you for sure, that's what the Raj holds. Okay, you could say that the Rabbi Yerucham is saying that in the Shittas Raj, but the Raj might argue that. You could potentially say that, but it doesn't seem. In other words, Rabbi Yerucham is saying that even the Machmirim are moed in this case. Okay, whether the Machmirim will agree to that, I can't tell you. Maybe they won't. I mean, he brings the Raj, but the Mechaber is passing like that day that says even the Machmirim will be makel if the food never left the fire. Okay. Now, second question is, on the Mechaber is, at the end of our din, okay, the Mechaber says, unchallenged, he says, Yesh Mishomer, that the Rosh is right. Okay? He says, Yesh Mishomer, that even if the bread came out of the oven, you could still put it back in. Okay, so he's saying the Rosh. And he's saying it over here unchallenged. He's just been Yesh Mishomer, which is not such an unusual way for the Mechaber to say Yesh Mishomer. Yesh Mishomer is not arguing on the first day, it's a new thing. Yesh Mishomer, there are those who say that if you took the bread out, you could still make it back into Pas Yisrael. So he seems to be bringing the Rosh as is, yet in Kufyud Gimel Tes, he brings it only as a b'makom b'shas ha'chag, and in all kinds of cases that are Erev Shabbos like that. You can be makel. Okay, so that's another version of the same question. And over here, so this is it's another version of the same question that I'm asking you. Okay, here he just brings the Yesh B'Shomer. Why doesn't he bring that he doesn't really pass like that Yesh B'Shomer? Okay, so there are potential answers. There are those. I mean.
Like you were saying.
That's correct. That's what the Chacham wants to say your answer. He wants to answer that question. There's no makar to it. You get the feeling.
You see so many differences where we're makel by pas akum or pas palto. You see there's school.
I know, but what irks me is how come no one's talking about mentioning this thing. How come no one's saying it says Yesh B'Shul Omer, but see later on that he's going to pass in different for Bishul Akum or something like that.
What did Achraim say?
They don't. That's a shit. Right, so on the first question, I'm not bothered on the first.
Even your turn bothers me. Say something.
It's in the bed. Oh, yeah, Brichodesh says, go look at the bed of Kabayas and you'll see that he explains that this is a different case than that case. There's a lot, the first part, it's coming right out of the bed of Kabayas. The Beis Yosef explains to you why he's saying differently in this case. That's good. That doesn't bother. Maybe it's not, but that I understand. I'm saying, so you want to see? You see the Brichodesh says like that.
You're explaining
the second.
You're not explaining all that credit between then and the now. Why didn't it say anything?
For the second part is what bothers me. The first part is, I'm saying the first part doesn't bother me as much because here is in the bed of Kabayas himself. He tells you what he means. So maybe someone should have spoken it out, but it doesn't bother me as much as the second one. No one's saying it. The second one is even now we're sort of got rid of the first one, but the second one is still saying the Rosh Hashita. Okay. One more question, which is, and this is just the keyest question. Okay, Al Mechaber said, the end of the din said that if you took the beginning of the din said that if it was Karmu Pnei Hapas, then the Yid could do chitui to make the food be Pas Yisrael. Okay, that's what it said. So the Minchas Yaakov, who's on the Torah's Hapas, that's why I mentioned it, on this din, asks a kasha, a Kiyas kasha. He says, in Hilchos Shabbos, it says, you're allowed to put bread into the Mechaber brings it in, you're allowed to put bread into the oven if it's baked, Karmu Pnei Hapas. If it reaches the stage of being Kamat Ben Drusai, you're allowed to put it into the oven before Shabbos, because, what's the reason why? Because no one's going to be Mechata. No, it's not fully cooked yet. It's only partially cooked.
Machal ben
So it's only Kamat Ben Drusai. So we would have said,
like a chant, right?
Your chant.
Have a half-cooked chant.
we would have said that the reason why you're allowed to do that is because no one has an incentive to stir it up, because it's basically edible anyhow. So you don't have so much to gain. We're not afraid someone's going to slip and make a mistake. It's basically edible anyhow. Okay, but the Rambam says, okay, I don't know this, but he brings the Beis on that and says that the Rambam says that the reason is because chitui ruins the bread. Okay? When the bread is already at the point of Karmu Pnei Hapas, being Machata B'Kachon ruins the bread. Now, I'm not a baker, but I'm assuming that he means is,
That's Rabbi Schwartz.
I'm assuming the reason is because when you're baking in an oven that doesn't have a thermostat, so when it gets bread gets to a certain point, now it just needs to be kept hot and to finish off its baking. But if you stir up the coals and make it extra hot, you're going to burn the bread. I'm guessing it's something, as opposed to in our ovens, it has a thermostat to keep it from getting too hot. If you stir it up, you might bake it. I don't know what. So it's not my.
That's
So
the
it's
Rambam.
not my problem why it is. But the Rambam says the reason is because it's not that we're not choisher some will do it because they don't have such an incentive, but we know that no one's going to be mechata b'kacholim because being mechata would ruin the bread at this point. It's bad for the bread. So, how can you say over here that the Yid could help make it pass Yisroel by being mechata b'kacholim? What the Yid's doing is ruining the bread. So how can it be that you're allowed, the way you make it bishul pass Yisroel is by ruining the bread? That doesn't make any sense.
This is the first, it has to be mashbiach, mafiyasa.
Mashbiach b'fiyasa means is that it's not fully cooked. So it cooks for 20 minutes out of 30. So it has... No. If you would say that the Yid can do something at this point,
They'll be mishabeh.
while the baking is not over yet, then the Yid participated in the baking. But if the thing he does is something that ruins the
So
baking...
he's asking.
So that's what I'm saying. It's
He's
obviously a sort of a situation where it's still, he's saying that it has to be mashbiach.
That you're saying, I understood that the word mashbiach is that the bread still has what to go, as opposed to what he's saying, what Moshe was saying was that the bread is 100% baked already, and at this point you're going to ruin it.
It still needs to be baked. And
It'll be a little harder
Will the
crust.
chitui help it? Will the chitui not help it?
The chitui, and that's, he's saying
We'll
that
hope it.
it could be that there's different levels of Karmu Hapas.
Okay.
At some points the chitui will help, and sometimes it will ruin it. So.
I mean, you might like a soft
But
crust, you might like a hard crust.
The chitui has to be done when it's going
So
to be.
you're
If it's
understanding,
going to be the
I
right.
understand, you're understanding that a tzorach hatanur means is a tzorach chitui b'tanur, or it can benefit from the chitui in the tanur. He doesn't say that. He says it's tzorach b'tanur means it still needs another 10 minutes to bake. Now, the way the Rambam had worked in that case of there was, it needs 10 more minutes, but it doesn't need to be stirred.
You're not gonna touch it.
It needs to be stirred. It needs 10 more minutes in the oven. You're saying it needs 10 more minutes, and
Which
the
is
soaking
soaking.
also to help it bake.
Right.
Okay.
Otherwise,
He didn't understand that way, because the Mechaber could be read to just mean that just needs more time in the
I
oven.
hear.
Okay. Anyhow, so he wants to say a Dochik teretz. He says it's a Dochik, that maybe, since for Pas Yisrael you only need a hecker, the Yid only has to just show that he's involved, so a hecker can even be if it ruins the bread. Who cares? As long as the Yid had to do something,
Yes.
he did
Yes.
something, he did something. So he did something, he helped
Burn down
everything.
the building.
So-
Burn down the building. It's a
during the
hecker.
bread that he wants to use.
Is your
so
side-
it's very, he says himself that it's a Dochik. He says, it's hard to believe that even if you need a hecker, you got to do something that's useful rather than, or at least not hurtful. How can it be you're going to ruin it? He says it's a
Doesn't make any sense.
Thank you.
You're trying to make them eat. Why would you ruin the bread if you want
No,
to eat it?
because you want to show that I have to participate. You can't eat unless I cut.
But
Right,
what am I
you
gaining by
gain by making a hecker, not just making a hecker. You want to eat it. So if you're ruining it, you're
so
bringing the
hecker,
bread.
hecker can't be that I throw my shoe at the oven. Right? That's not a hecker. The point hecker is I do something
Right, but the only-
baking related.
but the
So
only-
soaking coals is like
The only
that.
reason you're doing the hecker is to give you a header to eat the bread. If you're ruining the bread in the process, you defeat the purpose of making the hecker.
Okay. He says it's better. What can I tell you? That's what he says.
Let's say I like it a hard crust. He likes it a soft crust. Where does
But
the...
imagine, I mean, you're
That's
still you're
the-
ruining it, okay? But you're still baking it.
Still hot.
There is a truth to also. It's not a complete ruin. You're not taking smashing it up like it's worse than it was before. About it's better than it was before. About it's better. But chitui is something you don't want to normally do. Like on Shabbos, you don't normally want to do it.
You're scared to
because
eat the food.
right, because it comes out better without the chitui.
Yeah. So chitui, what you did helped or hurt? What you did was it good or bad?
it hurts, but it's
Meiser.
but it bakes it, but it makes it worse than it would have baked otherwise.
Right, so you hurt. So my say is you did something that was bad for the food. So he's saying is that you didn't throw a shoe at the oven. You did something that has to do with the baking process. That's with the baking process because it makes baking happen. It makes baking happen in a bad way, but at least it's making baking happen.
Well, how long does it have to bake?
You are baking.
You're doing something in the baking of it. You overbaked it, but at least you did something for baking. At least you did something. Okay.
There's also a difference. In Shabbos, we're no afraid.
It's a
I said his doichik is
It's still a hacker.
that it's all you need is a hacker. So since all you need is a hacker, even a bad hacker, even a hacker that ruins a
It
hacker is a
doesn't help
hacker.
by Pasach. It doesn't help by Pasach.
Why?
That's all about what do you call it? That's the Rashi in the Rashi, right?
Yeah, well,
By Shachas Kisim, right? It says, "Ela hacker shepito moser."
right.
So what does it mean?
You told me, according to those who hold that for Bishul Akma doesn't work. So okay, but he's
the rush.
we luckily for us we're in Pas Akum, okay? We're talking about in Pas.
So no, not supposed to pass. By Pas Akum, hacker ba'am helps.
Yes.
That's what's
Okay.
Put up a
There's a
sign.
difference between Shabbos and this case.
That could be the Rajva.
Shabbos, we're afraid that you might do something like just by rote. A person, no, chitui, all these gezeros of covering a father, so a person might not realize what's going on, and everyone will just go and stoke a fire. So, but here, you're consciously stoking a fire. Maybe you'll do it, since you're consciously doing it, you might do it in a way that's not going to ruin the bread.
Okay, so that's
Is
the
that
point.
possible?
That's his answer is that if you just an oven, it needs 10 more minutes. Nobody would stoke it because that's going to ruin it. In the next 10 minutes, you're going to ruin it. But if you want to be extra careful, you're doing a special job. You're stoking it, and then you'll readjust it, or you'll take it out early, or something like that. You can maybe somehow save it and not ruin the bread. Right. So we're trying to say, in other words, it's possible if you have a special focus.
Right.
Yeah, I'm trying to save my bread. I'll stoke it. It'll get a little hotter. So therefore, I'll move it a little higher, or I'll move it to the side. I'll take it out
early.
Yeah. As opposed to the Rambam on Shabbos is talking about the guy is just walking by the oven, and he might. We have no chashash he's going to do that because no normal person would do that. But here you make a special point. You can do that. Okay, maybe that's the answer. That's not what the Mikdash. No, that's a good answer. Okay, I didn't say the better answers. Don't worry. So it's a. So we,